So, Greg, Aaron was just talking about the black boxes. What will the plane's black boxes tell us? What can we learn from them? And how critical is it to find the helicopter black box as well?
Well, currently with the regional jet, of course, the flight data recorder will give investigators a very good flight path as far as what the aircraft was doing at any point, time, and space. It's really going to be the cockpit voice recorder. What was going on between the two pilots in the cockpit? What did they know? What did they see? What were they looking for based on information and conversations that were transpiring, not only between them, but the air traffic controller? And then it'll be also to try and understand whether or not they were able to hear the conversation that was taking place between the controller and the Black Hawk crew.
So, Tim, there are still the remains of 26 victims yet to be found. The helicopter black box is still out there, so that's one thing that they're looking for. But talk to me through the challenges of this search. I mean, obviously, it's very cold. It's very icy in the Potomac. And then also you have the situation with currents.
Right. I mean, the elements are what they are. It's probably the worst time of year for this to happen. But they do have shallow water. All things considered, this is not at depth. So they can control a lot of that. Bringing in salvage gear to lift the equipment is important to help the search, because the search is a priority right now. People have to be found, and they have to be returned to their families. And whether that disturbs the investigation, some of the data is secondary to the actual finding them.
Well, let me ask you about that, because the NTSB, the head of the NTSB made that point yesterday in saying, basically, we're not rushing this.
Right.
We should not rush to a conclusion in the first, at that point, 24 hours. A good bit of what you do is helping people find out what happened to their loved ones. And I think there's a pretty easy argument to be made for anyone who has followed these kinds of stories that, yes, while families want to know what happened, first and foremost, they want the return of their family member. They want to be able to have a funeral to say goodbye. So talk about that and the push that we saw from the president, from some other folks, to get an answer, and fast.
Well, the NTSB and FAA, in my world, the Coast Guard, the investigation takes months, if not years. Okay, you need to collect all the data, and they said it earlier. They're collecting facts. They're not making judgments, and it's irresponsible in so many ways to do that for at least the family members at this stage. But to come out with conclusions, this speculation, there's public opinion about all this. People can say that, you know, the helicopter was flying too high or whatever, but that's all just preliminary stuff that's out in the ethos and spinning around. Just don't let the conspiracy theories get you. There's facts here. They just have to be moved into the realm of grouping them together and studying them, and it's a process. And these guys are well underway to that process, but they also know that the families come first. The families, and that's where they have to be right now.
So I want to bring in Alan Diehl, a former NTSB investigator who knows Reagan National very well. And first of all, good to see you. NBC News can report that the NTSB is trying to figure out if the helicopter was flying too high. It's just one part. As Tim was just talking about, there's a lot of factors. The folks yesterday at the press conference talked about that. There are multiple factors involved in deciding ultimately what happened here. But can you talk about that one thing? You know, this airport, we have actual footage of a plane on approach as they fly over the water. Where do helicopters normally fly? And what about the awareness between plane and helicopter?
Well, first of all, you probably also are aware the FAA has closed that route, and
yes.
that helicopter 4 route is what it's designated, has a hard ceiling, as they say, of 200 feet above the ground, above sea level. It's been reported and not confirmed that the helicopter may have been higher, and that's why they're reading the black boxes. I understand this Black Hawk also had a combined cockpit voice and flight data recorder. That will be the gold standard in establishing the height or elevation, I guess the Secretary of Defense said, of the helicopter. Was it above 200 feet? Therefore, operating improperly.
And I know that you have worked on Black Hawk mishaps before. How significant is it that the crew on the chopper that night was using night vision goggles? And tell us about the particularities of flying at night.
Well, of course, when I went to work for the NTSB, we used to carry beepers, and I noticed that my beeper didn't go off at night a lot. It was 7 times as dangerous to fly at night as during the daytime, but that's all background. NVGs, when I went to work for the Air Force, I had to use NVGs to investigate their crashes. To understand, I'm an aviation psychologist. We wanted to understand what the pilots can see with NVGs versus with the naked eye. And NVGs are used typically in tactical environments, which are quite dark. The enemy is hiding from you, and these devices are very helpful in that situation. Now you've got a person that's taking an annual check ride. She has to demonstrate competence with NVGs. We don't know whether or not the NVGs were actually over their eyes. They do flip up. They're like binoculars mounted on your flight helmet. So that's what the NTSB and the Army will want to understand. And of course, the voice recorder on the helicopter will probably help with that, as well as the forensic evidence of examining the helmets of the deceased Army aviators. So all of that's going to come into play. And yes, NVGs do complicate the ability to see other targets at night, and particularly in a situation where you have a lot of ground lights and a lot of aircraft up. You know, there's been speculation about whether or not they were really looking at the American airline regional jet or some other airplane when they told the controllers they had it in sight. One of the pilots told the controllers he had it in sight, or she had it in sight.
Let me talk about the air traffic control then, Greg, as we talk about the multiple things that are being looked at right now, because NBC News has learned there was just one person essentially doing the job of 2. In fact, the Washington Post has a memo. We have not seen it at NBC, but it says 2 people were actually doing the job of 4. In other words, instead of splitting, this person takes care of the planes, another person takes care of the helicopters. One person was doing both, or 2 people were doing both. How unusual is that, and how big of a factor could that play?
Well, there's 2 parts to that, Chris. One, of course, is combining those positions. When you combine the position, it's based on workload or a supervisor determination whether or not the workload is such that one person can handle multiple frequencies and handle the duties and responsibilities. The bigger question here, though, is we know that it was a combined position. What during the course of that combined position did that controller become distracted? It's apparent that he wasn't looking at his screen, because as these 2 aircraft came on a converging flight path, he would have gotten a collision alert. And that blossoms up on the radar screen. We saw this in Lexington with, again, where you had one controller handling a RJ that was taking off out of, it was Comair, out of Lexington. He failed to follow the aircraft as it was taxiing. The aircraft got on the wrong runway and took off, led to a 49 fatal accident. We've seen this as the NTSB before. They're going to be looking at it and scrutinizing, was there some distraction? Did the controller, while handling that particular position, talking to both aircraft and helicopter, did he become distracted doing something else that he didn't do what he needed to do as far as collision alert?
Another part of this, obviously, Tim, will be the wreckage when they start to try to piece it together. No, this is not deep sea, which is some of the work you have done, right? The Potomac is not the Pacific or Atlantic Ocean. Having said that, how complex is it to get, and this we already know that the main part of the wreckage is broken into 3 pieces, right? To remove it in such a, first of all, just to remove it, but remove it in such a way that the integrity of it that helps people understand what happened when the collision occurred is preserved.
Yeah, well, it's exponentially harder to do anything when water is involved, whether it's 1,000 feet deep or if it's 10 feet deep. Saying that, though, this is confined water. It's not out in the ocean, so you're not going to get as much waves, but you do have current. But they can come in with jack-up barges that come in with pilings that they just stick into the ground and they jack the barge up and it's stable. They can put a crane on that. They can move these major pieces up onto a barge and have them moved out to another location on dry land to study. That being said, all the small record is now in the mud and all around, and they have to, like any NTSB investigation, they have to piece all the small parts together and find them. So what you'll be using there is robotics and sonar, even local boat-mounted sonar and multi-beam systems to find these, and then divers to dive down and pick them up. And the sonar will let you map it as well. So you'll have an exact geo-referenced point in time and space that they can recreate where they are, where they found them, and therefore help put that puzzle back together when they're studying what happened.